My alien roommate's tradition made us share a bed. But she was in pain. Jack Davis had never imagined that his life would change this much. He was just a regular engineering student, juggling homework, part-time work, and the occasional gaming session. His world was predictable and mostly quiet, until the government's new program for interspecies cooperation turned everything upside down. Earth had officially opened its doors to the rest of the galaxy, and now alien life forms were living among them. Jack didn't exactly volunteer for the roommate program. In fact, he was a little reluctant when he found out he had been selected. As someone who valued his privacy, the idea of sharing his apartment with an alien was something he would have preferred to avoid. But the program was mandatory for university students who lived in campus-provided housing, and Jack had no choice but to go along with it. On the day his new roommate arrived, Jack was already waiting, pacing around his small apartment. He had been briefed about the alien species, a species called the Zelani, who were humanoid in shape but had distinct features that set them apart from humans. They were taller, with long arms, a silvery gray skin tone, and large, expressive eyes that could look almost human, but also had an otherworldly gleam to them. Jack had read the pamphlets, but no amount of reading could truly prepare him for the reality of living with an alien. The doorbell rang and Jack's heart skipped a beat. It was time. When he opened the door, he saw her. She was tall, maybe 6 feet 5 inches, with an elegant posture that made her appear more graceful than anyone Jack had ever seen. Her long silver hair cascaded down her back, shimmering in the light, and her skin reflected the light in strange, mesmerizing patterns. "Hello," she said, her voice melodic yet slightly mechanical. "I am Lyra of the Zelani. It is a pleasure to meet you, my new roommate." Jack tried to hide his shock. Hi, Jack," he stammered. "Nice to meet you too." Lyra gave him a polite smile and stepped into the apartment. She seemed completely at ease, her movements fluid and graceful. Jack, on the other hand, felt like a clumsy human trying to navigate a completely different world. Over the next few days, Jack tried to adjust to having Lyra around. She was quiet, at least at first, but very formal. She didn't smile much, and when she did, it seemed more like a learned behavior than a natural one. Jack wasn't sure what to make of it. She didn't eat the same food as him. Her diet was a mix of alien supplements and strange energy drinks that seemed to keep her going. The few times they tried to eat together, Jack ended up sitting in awkward silence, not really knowing what to say. One evening, as they were sitting together on the couch, Jack awkwardly scrolling through his phone, and Lyra absorbed in some kind of alien device, Lyra suddenly turned to him. "I must inform you of an important tradition of my people," she said, her voice serious. Jack paused, looking up at her. "What's that?" Lyra seemed to hesitate for a moment, which was strange considering how composed she usually was. "It is customary for members of my species to share a bed with another being to relieve pain during certain phases of our life. This is a tradition that strengthens bonds between individuals, and it is considered an essential practice." Jack blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "Wait, you want to share a bed?" Lyra's expression didn't change. "Yes, it is necessary for the healing process." The act of sharing physical space with another being is a form of support. Jack's mind raced. "I'm not sure I understand. What do you mean by pain?" "The pain I am referring to is not entirely physical," Lyra said. "It is a cyclical experience for my species. During certain times, our bodies undergo an intense phase of discomfort that can only be soothed by being in close proximity to another living creature." Jack blinked again. "So this is something that happens often?" "Once every few months," Lyra replied. "It's part of our biology, and according to tradition, it helps to bond with another to endure this discomfort. It is not something I can control. It is part of who I am." Jack shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The idea of sharing a bed with someone he barely knew was strange, to say the least, but something in Lyra's calm demeanor made him feel like this wasn't an option. It was a necessity for her. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," Lyra added, "but it is a tradition I must follow. If you are willing to help, it would mean a great deal to me." Jack's mind was still processing the idea. He had lived with a roommate before, but sharing a bed with them, that was a whole different ballgame. Yet the sincerity in Lyra's voice and her vulnerability struck a chord in him. "Okay," Jack said after a moment of hesitation. "I'll help. I don't really get it, but if it's important to you, I'll try." Lyra nodded, and for the first time, Jack saw something in her eyes that resembled gratitude. It was a small, fleeting moment, but it was there. The following night, Jack made sure the bed was set up as comfortably as possible. He even rearranged the pillows to give them both enough space. He tried to push aside the awkwardness of the situation, but as the night grew darker, the tension in the room only increased. Lyra lay down first, her long form curling beneath the covers. Jack hesitated, then joined her on the opposite side of the bed, making sure there was a noticeable gap between them. He had read that alien cultures had different ideas of personal space, but this still felt odd. At first, the silence between them was deafening. Jack tried to focus on the hum of the air conditioner or the sound of distant city traffic outside. But all he could think about was the warm body beside him and the strange, unfamiliar scent of Lyra's presence. The hours passed, and Jack began to notice something unsettling. Lyra's breathing had become erratic, and every so often she would let out a low, almost inaudible moan. Jack glanced over at her. She was curled up, her face twisted in discomfort, her eyes tightly shut as if trying to block out the pain. He didn't know what to do. He wasn't exactly trained in alien biology, but it was clear that she was in distress. "Lyra," Jack said softly, unsure if she could hear him. Her eyes opened slightly, and she looked at him. The pain in her gaze was unmistakable. "It is part of the process," she said weakly. "Do not worry." Jack could see that she was trying to hide it, but the pain was clearly affecting her. He wasn't sure how much of this he could handle. There was something deeply unsettling about seeing someone from another world, suffer right next to him. But despite the awkwardness, he realized something else. This wasn't just about the tradition. It was about helping someone in need. In that moment, Jack made a silent vow to do whatever he could to ease her suffering. The alien was no longer just an unknown roommate. She was someone who was hurting, and he couldn't just turn his back on her. The next morning, Jack woke up to an unfamiliar silence. The light from the window filtered into the room, casting a soft glow over the bed. He turned to see Lyra lying still beside him. She looked peaceful now, her features soft and relaxed, a stark contrast to the pain-filled expression she had worn the night before. Jack sat up slowly, careful not to disturb her. He wasn't sure what to do or how to feel about the whole situation. Sharing a bed with someone, especially someone so different, wasn't something he had ever imagined. But more than the awkwardness of it all, there was a deeper feeling growing inside him, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Lyra had never been anything but polite and composed, even when she was in pain. She had always kept a certain distance, both emotionally and physically. Yet last night, despite the strange tradition, Jack had felt something more. There was vulnerability in the way she had allowed herself to lean on him, to rely on him for comfort. It was strange how much he wanted to help her, even though he barely knew her. As Jack stood up and stretched, Lyra stirred beside him. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at him for a moment, her gaze clear and sharp despite the softness of her features. "Good morning," she said in her usual calm tone, though her voice was quieter than usual. Jack gave a small smile. "Good morning, how are you feeling?" Lyra sat up slowly, her long limbs graceful even in her slow movements. She winced slightly, but the pain seemed less than it had been the night before. "Better." "The discomfort is easing," she replied, her voice steady, but Jack could still hear the faint edge of exhaustion in it. Jack wasn't sure what to say next. He had only known Lyra for a few days, but he already felt like he was seeing a side of her that others probably didn't. She wasn't just the polite, composed alien he had been expecting. She was someone who had real struggles, real emotions, and they were starting to become clearer with each passing day. "I'm glad," Jack said, rubbing his face. "I'm not really sure how this whole tradition thing works, but I'm just happy you're feeling better." Lyra nodded, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of doubt perhaps, or maybe just the weight of the unspoken thoughts between them. "You are kind to help, Jack. I know this is uncomfortable for you, for both of us." Jack looked at her, surprised by her honesty. He hadn't expected her to acknowledge the awkwardness. "It's fine, I don't mind. You're my roommate after all," he said, trying to keep his tone casual. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized it wasn't just about being a good roommate. There was something deeper there, a desire to truly understand Lyra, to help her in a way that felt genuine. Lyra seemed to study him for a moment, her large eyes analyzing him as if she were trying to read something beneath his words. After a long pause, she spoke again. There is a bond that forms between us when we go through this tradition. It is not just a physical connection. It is emotional, spiritual even. For my people, sharing this experience means something more. It is the foundation of trust, of understanding. I did not expect you to understand, she said, her voice almost a whisper. Jack sat back down on the bed, considering her words. He hadn't thought about it that way. To him, it had felt like just a strange obligation, a way to make her feel better. But for Lyra, it was far more than that. It was a ritual that had meaning, one that went beyond the surface. I guess I never thought about it like that, Jack admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. I thought it was just a cultural thing, like something you had to do, but I see what you mean. Lyra's lips curved into a small smile, the first real one he had seen since meeting her. Yes, it is something we must do to maintain balance. I had hoped you would understand eventually. Jack felt a little embarrassed, but also strangely touched. Lyra, despite being from an entirely different world, was looking to him for support, for understanding. That thought made him feel more connected to her than he ever expected. Are you okay now? Jack asked, his voice a little more sincere than he intended. I mean really okay? Lyra's smile faded slightly as she turned away from him, her expression distant for a moment. Not entirely. The pain is not fully gone, but I will be fine. Jack frowned. If you're not feeling well, I can always, I don't know, help out again. You shouldn't suffer through it alone. Lyra turned back to him, her expression softened by something akin to gratitude. It is kind of you to offer, Jack, but you have done enough already. The tradition is complete for now. Jack didn't know what else to say. He felt a strange mix of relief and concern. He didn't want to push Lyra, but he also didn't want to leave her in pain, even if it was part of her species' rituals. The thought of her enduring this on her own felt wrong. I still don't really get it, Jack said, his voice almost to himself. The whole bonding thing, I mean, we don't exactly have traditions like that on Earth. Lyra studied him for a moment before answering. It is difficult to explain. To my people, this practice is not just about physical proximity. It is about sharing a part of yourself with another being. It is about trust, about offering your strength and receiving strength in return. It is an exchange that goes beyond words. Jack was quiet for a moment, thinking. I think I get it, sort of. It's not just about being there physically. It's about being there, emotionally. Lyra nodded. Yes, that is correct. It is about connection in every sense of the word. Jack was silent as he processed her words. He couldn't imagine living with such a tradition, where physical touch and emotional bonds were so deeply tied together. It made him think about the relationships in his own life, the people he had grown close to over the years. None of them had ever asked for something like this, but somehow in this strange, alien context it felt right. So what now? Jack asked after a pause. Do we just go back to normal? Lyra glanced at him, her gaze thoughtful. There is no normal for us, Jack. After the tradition, we continue on, but the bond remains. We are closer now. In a way, we understand each other more. Jack didn't know how to respond to that. It was so different from anything he had experienced, yet he could feel it. The connection between them had shifted in ways he didn't fully understand but could sense in his bones. He wasn't just helping an alien to get through a painful ritual. He had become part of it, part of her journey. And in some strange way, that made him feel less alone, even in the most bizarre situation imaginable. I guess we're in this together then, Jack said, offering her a small smile. Lyra nodded, her eyes softening again. Yes, we are. The rest of the day passed in a haze for Jack. He went through the motions of his daily life, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the night before, to the connection he had shared with Lyra. It was more than just a tradition. It was something deeper, something that bound them together in a way he had never anticipated. Later that evening, after dinner, Lyra sat by the window, her gaze lost in thought. Jack wasn't sure what she was thinking, but he felt the pull of curiosity. He walked over to her and sat down beside her, his eyes drawn to the city lights outside. It's strange, isn't it? Jack said softly, living with someone so different from you. Lyra turned to look at him, her large eyes reflecting the soft glow of the streetlights outside. Yes, but it is also beautiful, don't you think? Jack smiled. Yeah, it is. They sat in silence for a while, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was something comforting about simply being there with her, sharing this strange, unexpected bond between two beings from different worlds. Jack awoke the next morning to an odd sense of peace. He had barely slept, yet he felt more rested than he had in days. The bond he had shared with Lyra the night before had left an unfamiliar calm in him, as if the connection between them had shifted into something deeper. He couldn't explain it, but there was something different now. Lyra was still asleep when Jack got up. He glanced over at her, watching her breathe evenly as she rested. It was strange to think that just hours ago she had been in so much pain, yet now she appeared serene. Jack wondered if the tradition truly helped her or if it was something else entirely. It wasn't just physical discomfort. There was something more personal at play, something about sharing that moment with another being. The apartment was quiet, but Jack knew that things couldn't remain quiet for long. Lyra had been reserved since they'd shared the bed, and Jack wasn't sure if it was due to the pain or something else. She had thanked him for his help, but the words had felt somewhat distant. She was grateful, yes, but there was a wall between them now, one Jack couldn't quite figure out. He tried to shake off the feeling and went about his morning routine. After making coffee and eating a quick breakfast, Jack sat down at his desk, trying to focus on his assignments for the day. But as usual, his thoughts kept drifting back to Lyra. He found himself wondering about the Zelani culture, about the things he would never understand, and the things they might share if they could ever bridge the gap between their worlds. When Lyra finally stirred, it was late morning. She didn't speak right away but made her way to the kitchen, moving gracefully as usual. Jack watched her from his desk, unsure how to act. Should he bring up last night? Would that make her uncomfortable? He hadn't expected to feel so unsure around her, but after everything, things seemed different. Lyra set down a tray of food in front of him, breaking the silence. "You have made progress with your work," she said, her tone still as polite as ever. There was no warmth in her words, not yet, but Jack could sense she was trying to be the same as before, even though everything between them had changed. Jack looked up at her, meeting her gaze for the first time since they had shared the bed. "Yeah, I guess I'm just not sure where to start." He gestured to the piles of papers on his desk. "There's so much to do and not enough time." Lyra raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his frustration. "Time is a human construct," she said, as if stating the obvious. "You can always make more." Jack chuckled despite himself. If only it were that easy. Lyra smiled faintly at the joke, but her expression quickly shifted back to something more serious. "Jack," she began slowly, "I want to thank you for last night. It was not easy for either of us, but it helped. In a way I didn't expect." Jack looked at her, trying to gauge whether she was being completely honest or simply following the formality of their shared experience. "I'm glad it helped," he said, his voice sincere. "I didn't know what I was doing, but I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Lyra nodded. "I could feel your presence. It was comforting. Your willingness to help me, to be there for me, is not something I can easily repay. You have shown me something I did not expect from a human." Jack shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "It wasn't a big deal. I just did what seemed right. You were in pain, and I didn't want you to go through it alone." There was a long pause as Lyra studied him, her large eyes never leaving his face. "For my people," she said, breaking the silence, "such acts of kindness are sacred. They go beyond the physical. They build something between us that words cannot describe. You helped me in a way that is more meaningful than you might realize." Jack felt a warmth spreading through his chest at her words. It wasn't just gratitude she was showing. It was something deeper, something more real. He wasn't just some random human roommate helping out. He had become part of her world in a way that no one else had. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but part of him couldn't help but feel proud. "I didn't know I was making such a big impact," Jack admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "I guess I thought it was just a favor or something, but now that you mention it, I think I do understand a little bit." Lyra's gaze softened. "You do. Even if you don't fully understand our customs, your actions have created a bond between us, and that bond will remain." Jack nodded slowly. "I get it now. I mean, I can't really relate to your pain cycles or your traditions, but I know what it's like to need someone, to have someone there when you're struggling." Lyra smiled at him, a real smile this time, and it made Jack feel like he was finally seeing the person behind the alien exterior. She wasn't just a roommate or a stranger from another world. She was someone who had vulnerabilities, struggles, and a past that shaped her. Just like him, their conversation lingered in the air, and for the first time since meeting her, Jack felt truly connected to Lyra. The divide between their species was still there, undeniable and vast, but in this moment it didn't matter. What mattered was that they had shared something, something that had brought them closer. As the day went on, they continued their daily routine, but the atmosphere between them had changed. There was no longer any awkwardness. Jack found himself laughing at Lyra's dry sense of humor, and she seemed to enjoy his company more than she had before. It was subtle, but it was there. Later in the evening, after they had finished dinner, Jack found himself sitting with Lyra on the couch, the two of them watching a documentary about Earth's oceans. It was a quiet, peaceful moment, and Jack realized how much more comfortable he was around her now. He wasn't constantly second-guessing himself, and Lyra was no longer the distant, aloof roommate she had been when they first met. "Do you miss your home?" Jack asked suddenly, breaking the silence. It was a question that had been on his mind for a while, but he hadn't known how to ask it. Lyra looked at him for a moment, her eyes distant as she considered the question. "I miss the feeling of home," she said slowly, "but my people have adapted to Earth. It is no longer just a place I visit, it is a place where I live. My home is where I make connections, where I find meaning. It is not bound to a location." Jack nodded, understanding more than he expected. "That makes sense," he said, his voice thoughtful. "I think a lot of people feel that way in their own way. Home isn't just about where you are, it's about the people around you." Lyra studied him, a flicker of something in her gaze. "And now, Jack, you are part of my home." Her words were simple but heavy, and for the first time, Jack realized just how much they had come to rely on each other. Despite the differences in their species, their experiences had woven a thread between them, and it felt real. More than anything, Jack felt proud to be part of Lyra's journey, to be someone she could trust. As the evening turned to night, Jack couldn't help but think about how far they had come since their first awkward meeting. The road ahead would still be full of challenges, but for the first time, he felt ready to face them, not as a human and an alien, but as two beings who had shared something real. It wasn't just the tradition that had brought them together. It was the connection that had formed between them, something that no one could ever take away. The days that followed continued in a peaceful rhythm. Jack and Lyra had settled into an unusual but comfortable routine. There were still moments of silence, moments when words failed, but the bond they shared had grown stronger with each passing day. Jack had come to appreciate the little things about Lyra, her quiet strength, her dry humor, and her ability to make even the most awkward situations feel less uncomfortable. One afternoon, after a long day of studying, Jack decided to take a break. He had been working on a complicated engineering project that had been consuming most of his thoughts, and he needed some fresh air. Lyra was in the living room, reading something on her device, an alien tablet, he assumed. Jack didn't want to disturb her, so he grabbed his jacket and headed out. The sun was beginning to set as Jack walked through the campus grounds, the cool breeze brushing against his face. It felt good to be outside, away from the clutter of his apartment and the pressure of his work. He didn't have a specific destination in mind, just a desire to clear his head. As he walked, his thoughts inevitably turned to Lyra. He thought about her strange, fascinating culture, the traditions that had seemed so foreign at first but now made more sense to him. The more he learned about her species, the more he realized how much he still didn't know. There were layers to Lyra, things she had only hinted at in passing conversations, things she had never fully explained. Jack wondered if there was more to Lyra's pain cycle than just the physical discomfort. The way she had spoken about it, the way she had mentioned the emotional and spiritual aspects, suggested there was something deeply personal at play. It wasn't just a ritual to her. It was a part of her identity, something that shaped who she was. Jack didn't know if he was ready to ask more about it. The last time they had talked about it, Lyra had been distant, almost like she was holding something back. He didn't want to push her too hard, but he also felt like he couldn't ignore it. He had already crossed a line with her in a way. They had shared something so personal, so vulnerable, and yet he still didn't fully understand the depth of her experience. As Jack continued walking, his mind started to race. He didn't have all the answers, but he felt a deep sense of responsibility toward Lyra. She had trusted him in ways he didn't expect, and he wasn't sure if he was worthy of that trust. But at the same time, he knew he couldn't just walk away. Not now. Not after everything they had shared. When Jack returned to the apartment, the door was ajar, and he could hear soft music playing inside. It wasn't the usual quiet hum of Lyra's device, but something different, something more alive. Jack stepped inside and saw Lyra sitting at the table, her tablet set aside, her eyes closed as if she were meditating. "Hey, I didn't know you were playing music," Jack said as he walked over. Lyra opened her eyes and looked at him, the faintest smile on her lips. "It is not music as you know it. It is a form of expression, a way of connecting with the energy of the world around us." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Energy?" Lyra nodded. "Yes, we do not have music in the way your species does. But we have sound that resonates with the frequencies of our planet. It is a deep, soothing form of communication." Jack didn't fully understand, but he didn't feel the need to ask more. He had learned that with Lyra, sometimes it was better to simply listen than to question every detail. "It's nice," Jack said, sitting down across from her. "Very peaceful." Lyra's gaze softened, and she picked up her tablet again, her fingers brushing over the surface. "I've been thinking about your world, Jack, about how much I've seen in my time here, the complexities of your species, the way you navigate your lives." Jack leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Lyra paused, choosing her words carefully. "You humans are different from us. You struggle with your emotions in ways that are both fascinating and challenging. Your people are constantly searching for something, for meaning, for connection." Jack was taken aback by her insight. "I don't know if I'd call it struggling. It's just part of who we are, I guess. We try to understand the world, try to make sense of it." "Exactly," Lyra said, her voice thoughtful. "You try, but you often miss the deeper connections. The connections that are not so easily understood by your minds. You focus too much on what you can see, what you can measure. And yet you miss the most important part, the connections between hearts." Jack stared at her, his mind racing. Was she talking about their connection? The bond that had formed between them. Had Lyra picked up on something he hadn't even realized? "I don't think I'm as good at that kind of connection as you might think," Jack said, his voice quiet. "I mean, I'm just a regular guy, you know. I didn't know how to help you, I didn't know what your traditions meant, and I still don't really get it. I'm just trying." Lyra's gaze softened, and she reached out, placing her hand on the table between them. "You are doing more than you realize, Jack. You are learning. You are listening. That is more than most can say." Jack felt a lump form in his throat, and for the first time he realized just how much he had come to care about her. It wasn't just the responsibility of being a roommate or helping someone in pain. It was something deeper, something he hadn't anticipated. He cared about Lyra, not because she was an alien or because she was in pain, but because she was a person, someone who had shared something real with him, someone who had trusted him. "I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with all of this," Jack admitted, his voice low. "I didn't expect any of this, I didn't expect you." Lyra's smile returned, but this time it was full of warmth. "And that is the beauty of it. You didn't expect any of it, and yet here we are." It was never about expectations. It was about the journey. Jack felt a sense of understanding settle over him. He didn't have all the answers, but he didn't need them. What mattered was that they had taken this journey together, and that, somehow, it had brought them closer. He was no longer just her roommate. He was her confidant, her ally. He was someone who had shared a moment of vulnerability and come out the other side with a connection that transcended words. "So, what happens now?" Jack asked, his voice quiet but hopeful. "Where do we go from here?" Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with something that Jack couldn't quite name. "We continue. We learn from each other. We grow. That is the path of connection." Jack didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since meeting Lyra, he felt ready to face it. Whatever came next, they would face it together. As humans and Zelani, they had formed a bond that couldn't be broken. And in that moment, Jack realized that he wasn't alone anymore. He had someone who understood him in ways that no one else ever had. Someone who saw him not just as a human, but as a fellow being, trying to make sense of a complicated, unpredictable world. The days turned into weeks, and the routine between Jack and Lyra seemed to settle into something comfortable. They still had their moments of awkwardness, those quiet pauses when the weight of their differences hung in the air, but they had found a way to navigate around it. Their conversations had shifted from the practicalities of sharing space to deeper discussions about their respective cultures, their lives, and their personal experiences. Jack had never imagined how much he could learn from Lyra, but every conversation felt like a step closer to understanding not just her, but himself as well. Lyra had become a constant presence in Jack's life, more than just a roommate. She was a friend, a companion, and in some ways, a mirror reflecting parts of himself that he hadn't fully understood. Her calm demeanor and thoughtful perspective had a way of making everything feel a little less complicated. It wasn't just about helping her through her painful cycles anymore. It was about sharing in each other's journey. Jack had come to realize that their connection wasn't limited to the traditions and customs of her species. It was about two beings from different worlds coming together, sharing their struggles, their victories, and their vulnerabilities. There was a bond between them now, one that couldn't be broken by distance, differences, or misunderstandings. One evening, Jack returned to the apartment after a long day at the university. He had just completed a major project and was eager to relax. As he opened the door, he was greeted by the familiar sight of Lyra sitting on the couch, her alien tablet in hand, absorbed in some sort of document. "Hey," Jack said, closing the door behind him. "How was your day?" Lyra looked up at him, her expression calm but thoughtful. "I have been reflecting, Jack, on the journey we have shared so far." Jack raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Reflecting on what exactly?" Lyra put her tablet aside and gestured for him to sit beside her. "On how much has changed. How much we have both learned, not just from each other but from ourselves. When I first came here, I did not expect to form such a connection with you. I thought I would simply endure my time on this planet, learn what I could, and return. But now I see that my time here has been more than just observation. It has been a process of growth." Jack sat down beside her, surprised by the depth of her words. "You've grown a lot," he said softly. "I mean, when we first met, you were distant. It felt like we were strangers in the same space, and now it's like we've become part of each other's worlds." Lyra smiled at him, a small but genuine smile. "That is what I mean. I never expected this. I thought I would remain apart, but You have made me realize the importance of connection, not just between humans but between all beings." Jack felt a warmth spread through him at her words. "I get that," he said quietly. "I never thought I would be this close to someone who wasn't human, but I don't know. It just feels natural, like we were meant to cross paths." Lyra's expression grew more serious, and she reached out to place her hand on Jack's. "I believe that too," she said softly. "We are not so different, you and I. Yes, our biology is different. Our ways of thinking, of seeing the world are different, but our hearts are not so dissimilar." Jack looked down at her hand on his, feeling a strange sense of peace. He had never been one to dwell on the abstract, but in that moment he understood. The connection between them wasn't about being the same. It was about accepting each other, learning from each other, and being open to the possibilities of what could come from it. The doorbell rang, breaking the quiet moment between them. Jack stood up, feeling a little uneasy. He wasn't expecting anyone, and the unexpected interruption felt like an intrusion into their peaceful space. "I'll get it," Jack said, walking toward the door. As he opened it, he was met with the sight of a delivery person holding a small package. "Package for Jack Davis," the delivery person said, handing him a clipboard to sign. "Thanks," Jack said, signing for the package and taking it. He closed the door behind him and turned back to Lyra, who was watching him with curiosity. "Who's it from?" Lyra asked, her eyes scanning the small box in Jack's hands. "No idea," Jack replied, shaking the package slightly. "It's probably just a book or something. I ordered a few things a while ago." He sat back down beside Lyra and opened the package. Inside, he found a small, intricately carved object. It was an alien artifact, or at least that was what it looked like. The carving seemed to pulse with an eerie glow, the patterns shifting as Jack turned it in his hands. Lyra's eyes widened in recognition. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice tinged with awe. "I didn't order it," Jack said, looking at her in confusion. "It just showed up." Lyra reached out and carefully took the artifact from Jack's hands, her fingers tracing the patterns. "This is from my people. It is a relic from the ancient times, a symbol of unity. It is said that when beings from different worlds are destined to come together, such an artifact will appear." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Are you saying this is meant for us?" Lyra looked at him, her expression serious but not fearful. "Yes, it is a sign that the connection we have is more than just coincidence. It is something deeper, something that transcends our species, our worlds." Jack was speechless. He had never believed in fate or destiny, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. The artifact in Lyra's hands seemed to hum with a quiet energy, as if acknowledging the bond they had formed. "This is incredible," Jack said, his voice filled with awe. "So what does this mean for us?" Lyra placed the artifact carefully on the table between them, her eyes never leaving it. It means that our connection is not an accident, Jack. It means that we are meant to be part of something greater. Not just as individuals, but as representatives of our species. We have shown that two beings so different can find common ground, and that is the beginning of something much bigger. Jack sat in silence, processing what she had said. The weight of her words was heavy, but they felt right. They had crossed boundaries, cultural, emotional, and even biological, and found something real, something that neither of them had expected. "I don't know what comes next," Jack said softly, "but I do know that I want to see where this goes, with you, whatever it is." Lyra smiled, her eyes softening. "That is all I ask, Jack, to walk this path together. We do not know what the future holds, but we can face it side by side." Jack nodded, feeling a surge of emotion. He had never been one for grand speeches or declarations, but in this moment, words didn't seem necessary. They understood each other in a way that no one else could. They had shared something so personal, so deep, and it had changed them both. As they sat there, the evening growing darker outside, Jack realized that this was just the beginning. They had crossed the first threshold, but there was so much more to explore, to learn, and to discover together. For the first time, Jack felt truly connected, not just to Lyra, but to something larger than himself. They were two beings from two worlds, learning from each other and growing together. And that connection was something that would last, no matter what the future held. The artifact between them seemed to glow softly in the dim light, a reminder of the bond they had forged. And as they sat together, Jack knew that no matter where life took them, they would always have this. This connection, this understanding, this bond. It was more than just a tradition. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one they would write together.